Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty significant happening in Germany.
hmm
The Alternative for Deutschland party, the AfD, has been classified as a right-wing extremist by their domestic intelligence agency, the BfV.
Yeah, the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz.
Ah,
And we've got several news reports covering this. And also, importantly, the international reaction,
mm-hmm.
especially from the U.S.
Right. It's definitely making waves beyond Germany.
It is.
So our aim here is to really, unpack this. Why now? What does this classification actually mean for the AfD? And why is it stirring up such a debate internationally? We want to give you a really clear sense of what's going on.
Okay, sounds good. Where should we start? The classification itself.
Yeah, let's start there. The German side of things first.
Fine.
What exactly did the BfV decide?
Okay, so the BFV has now labeled the entire AfD party as, and this is the term they use, confirmed right-wing extremist.
Confirmed. And that's a change, right? Because parts of the party were already classified.
Exactly. That's the key thing. Before, this designation only applied to certain state-level branches, particularly in Eastern Germany, where the AfD is quite strong electorally.
Okay.
Now it's the whole federal party. A big escalation.
So what's their reasoning? What specific justification did the BfV give for this, nationwide classification?
Their main argument centers on what they call the AfD's prevailing understanding of people based on ethnicity and descent.
Ethnicity and descent.
Yeah. They argue this core idea is fundamentally incompatible with Germany's free democratic order. It's not just policy disagreements. It's about the very foundation of their ideology, according to the BFE.
So it's about how the AfD defines who is German, like based on bloodlines rather than citizenship.
That seems to be the core of the BFE's concern, yes.
Yeah.
They pointed specifically to the AfD's stance on citizens from predominantly Muslim countries.
Oh, okay.
The agency believes the AfD doesn't see these individuals as sort of equal members of the German people.
Right. Which underlines that point about ethnicity over, say, shared civic values or the Constitution.
Precisely. The BFV report apparently states the AfD aims to exclude certain population groups from equal participation in society.
Exclude them. Wow.
And subject them to unconstitutional, unequal treatment, which would lead to a kind of legally devalued status. Pretty strong language.
That is strong language. And
Yeah.
this classification, it's not just a label, is it? It has practical consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It gives the authorities significantly more power to monitor the party.
Like what kind of powers?
We're talking about things like potentially intercepting phone calls, using undercover agents, basically a much higher level of surveillance.
Okay.
It's the kind of toolkit usually reserved for groups seen as a direct threat to the Constitution. So it's definitely got real teeth.
I imagine the AfD isn't taking this lightly. What's been their response?
Not at all. Predictably, they've reacted very strongly. The party leaders, Alice Weidel and Tino Kruppala, immediately called it clearly politically motivated.
Politically motivated.
Yeah, and a severe blow to German democracy. Basically, they're framing it as an attack by the establishment on a popular opposition party.
And I saw some other quotes too. Beatrix von Storch.
Yes, the deputy parliamentary leader. She used even stronger terms, didn't she?
Yeah, comparing it to how an authoritarian state, a dictatorship, would handle opposition parties.
Right. That really shows their narrative.
Yeah.
That this is an undemocratic move to silence them.
Okay, so deep divisions in Germany. But as you mentioned, this spilled over internationally. Let's talk about the U.S. reactions. What stood out there?
Well, some prominent figures weighed in quite heavily. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, for instance, used X, formerly Twitter, to call the classification tyranny in disguise.
Tyranny in disguise. From the U.S. Secretary of State about Germany's actions.
Yes. He also highlighted the AfD's popularity, pointing out they came second in the recent election, and argued the real extremism was, in his view, the government's deadly open border immigration policies.
That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
Very direct. Was he alone?
No, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance also chimed in. He accused bureaucrats of trying to destroy the AfD.
Destroy them.
And he made this analogy about rebuilding the Berlin Wall, but saying it was the German establishment doing it this time.
Wow. And didn't he have some prior contact with the AfD?
He did. He had met with Alice Weidel before the election, apparently gave a supportive speech around the Munich Security Conference. So there's some existing connection there.
Interesting context. And then Elon Musk got involved too.
Yep. He replied to Vance's post with "Fate loves irony."
Yeah.
And Musk has, previously shown support for the AfD. He even did a live stream with Weidel and recommended people vote for them.
Okay, so quite a bit of high-profile U.S. commentary, mostly critical of the German decision. How did Germany respond to that, did they?
They did, quite directly, actually. The German Foreign Office responded to both Rubio and Vance directly on X.
On X. That's unusual for diplomacy, isn't it?
It is quite direct, yeah. They defended the classification, calling it an act of democracy, based on a thorough and independent investigation to protect their constitution and the rule of law.
So, pushing back firmly.
Very firmly. And they brought up history, didn't they?
Yes, that was notable. They said, we have learned from our history that right-wing extremism needs to be stopped. A clear reference to the Nazi past.
Absolutely. It puts their action in that specific German historical context, framing it as a necessary defense based on past trauma.
And they also pointed out that this isn't the final word legally, right?
Correct. They stress that the AfD can appeal the decision. It goes through the independent courts, and they will ultimately decide. So it's subject to judicial review.
Okay. So we have the classification, the reasons, the AfD's anger, the U.S. criticism, and Germany's defense. What are the wider implications here? What could happen next?
Well, one major potential implication is the discussion around banning the party outright.
Banning them? Is that seriously on the table?
It's being talked about. Lars Klingbeil, a leader from the SPD party, part of the governing coalition, mentioned it as a possibility. He said the AfD wants to destroy our democracy.
That's a huge step, banning a party, especially one with significant electoral support.
It is. And that's the tension, isn't it? The AfD got, what, over 20% of the vote in the last federal election? 152 seats?
Yeah, second place. So they have a substantial voter base, despite all this.
Absolutely. Which makes the idea of a ban extremely controversial, even if some see it as necessary.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? There's a broader European context.
Definitely. We're seeing rises in support for right-wing nationalist parties in various European countries. So how Germany handles the AfD is being watched very closely elsewhere. It touches on wider debates about populism and extremism across the continent.
Right. And there was one other angle mentioned, the connection to Russia, especially with the war in Ukraine.
Yes, Ukraine's ambassador to Germany, Alexei Makayev, raised concerns about the AfD's alleged ties to Russia.
That adds another layer, particularly given Germany's strong support for Ukraine.
Exactly. Having a major political party, now formally labeled extremist, potentially having links with Russia, that raises obvious national security concerns for Berlin, especially in the current geopolitical climate.
Okay, so let's try to sort of bring it all together.
Yeah.
We have Germany's intelligence agency labeling the entire AfD extremist based primarily on views about ethnicity and belonging that they say undermine the Constitution.
Right, which gives authorities more monitoring powers.
And it's caused a major backlash from the AfD itself, who call it political persecution, and also sharp criticism from some prominent U.S. figures like Rubio, Vance, and Musk.
While the German government defends the move as a necessary defense of democracy, rooted in historical lessons, and points out it can be challenged in court.
And the potential consequences are huge, maybe even a discussion about banning the party, despite their significant electoral success. All happening against a backdrop of rising right-wing politics in Europe and concerns about potential Russian influence.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well. It really forces you to think about some difficult questions, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like what?
Well, like how far can or should a democracy go to protect itself from ideologies that it considers fundamentally threatening? Where is that line drawn? And in today's world, with everything so connected, what role do international voices like those U.S. figures play, or should they play, in what is essentially a domestic German political and legal process? It's complex stuff.